Alright, so this video is going to talk through splines, how we extend and trim, and then how we use canvases to kind of bring real-world objects and dimensions into our Fusion 360 models. So we're going to start by looking at a spline, which is basically a fancy way to say a curve that we can kind of control the points on. So basically, I start selecting points. You see that I get these curves. And then when I double click at the end, I then have these kind of control lines that I can start to pull around and move. And when I do that, it'll update what that shape looks like. So I can pull the points, the black points, or I can pull those green lines to start to look at what type of curvature I want at that point. So I can again adjust the endpoints, the black points, and those green lines to make that spline look like however I want it to be. So when I have a shape that has some curvature, spline is a really powerful way to start to draw that shape. I can rename those and then I can adjust it by right-clicking on it. A tool that we're going to use as well is our offset tool. An offset tool is basically taking a shape and making it a certain distance from the original shape. I can go above or below in this case. You'll notice as I go above, my curve becomes a point because of the way that geometry intersects with each other. And so I can specify the distance, or I can look at the all right, so we have our original shape, and then we have our offset values from there that we have moved those. All right, so I'm gonna make some lines here, and they're just gonna cross my shape at various points because I want to get some points of intersection, and then maybe what I want to do is break up my line or cut my line depending on where they are. So I look and I have a trim, which is basically this cutting shape. So you think about those lines as blades, where if I click on a point, I can cut it at that point of the line. It's again a really powerful way to trim values as they overlap. I can also extend if I want to bring a line to another line, and it will extend that line so that it meets the line that I've set it as. Let me do another one where I have my extension. You can see that that line will extend to a line that's out in space as I click on the extend function. So again, just making other random lines at this point to try to look at what my extension component is going to do when I do it. So there's my extend. You can see it wants to extend out up. It doesn't quite go all the way. That one is going to extend up. So you have to kind of play around with which lines you're looking at to get them to be in the correct orientation. Now I can click that twice, and then if I click it again, I can actually get it to extend to that further line. And now I've extended that line all the way across. I haven't changed the geometry of the other pieces as I have moved it. All right, let's say I want to break a point. So I have this line that's one continuous line and I want it to be broken up at different points. I can click on break and then I can basically click on the point and I see it's taking that line and now I have different line segments that I can adjust if I want to. So we'll finish that sketch and what we'll look at is how do we bring in some kind of real world components? So to do that, I'm going to create a sketch. I'm going to try to orient myself. I'm going to turn off that other sketch, it's getting in the way. And I have my sketch plane. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a canvas. So a canvas is a fancy way to talk about putting a picture into my Fusion 360 design. So I have a picture that I took of just everyday objects on a table. I specify my sketch plane, and basically it's going to ask me where I want to move it. I'm going to try to orient it a little bit. But basically, I'm going to adjust this anyway, so it doesn't really matter where I put it. I'm going to be able to adjust it down the road in terms of scaling it. So I have it just moving it around. You see you can adjust where it is, up or down, and then just hit OK. And right now, when I look at it, if I zoom in, it's really small. And what I did is I actually took a picture of a ruler with my object. So that's going to allow me to scale my canvas as I go through it. So what I'm going to do is look at my canvas. I see it's there. I'm going to right click on it. I see the canvases are above it. So if I want to actually edit the canvas, what I'm going to have to do is get back to my canvas. And then open it up and then right click on that and go down to calibrate. So calibrate is going to basically, if I take a known distance, so I'm going to zoom all the way in, and basically I know where an inch is because I have my ruler there. So that's an inch. So I specify that distance to be 1 inch. And now what it does is it scales the whole thing to be the correct size. So now the sunglasses, scissors, spoon, every object in there is scaled to those distances based on our value. We can create a sketch on top of our canvas, and then we can start to actually outline shapes for our real world objects. So if we draw a line from really roughly there, 0 to our values, the actual values on the ruler are going to line up because we've scaled everything appropriately. So that's a good thing to check to make sure that things are coming through the way that we think they are as we're going through this. All right. So what we're going to do then is look at how do we take this now and we can make sketches on top of it so that we can get our objects. I'm going to get rid of that. Show it again because I can't really see the 3. There is 1, and you can see that when I specify 1 inch, that's going to line up right where we had our 1 inch mark on our. So everything is scaled appropriately. So now what we can do is basically trace our outlines. So we have our shapes, and we can use the different tools. We can use lines, we can use arcs, we can use splines to outline our shapes as we go through it. And then what we'll do is we'll offset those shapes so that we could actually cut something like this out and make a holder or something that would actually contain these shapes as we're in the real world. So again, this one is relatively simple because it's pretty square. And then I'm going to go back up, and I want it to be across from that one. So I'm going to hover over that and bring it across and see if I can find where that point is. And now what I'm going to do is I want to use an arc between those so that I can actually adjust that value. So I'm going to hit escape, go over to the arc, a 3-point arc. There's 1 point, there's another, and then I'm going to pull it up to be about there. And it is shaded that shape, and it's a closed shape around that paintbrush. So if I want to offset that now, I can pull it out, and let's say I'm going out some specified distance, just enough so that shape would be able to fit, and then I'd hit OK. So I'm going to go, it looks like a 1/16 of an inch, and now what I have is I have a way to, in the real world, put that paintbrush into a holder. So I can continue that with all my other shapes. I could take my pen and I can start to outline that, looking at what those shapes are. So I have a circle in the middle there, right, that I'm going to go from. And then if my shapes overlap, I can use my trim tool to actually trim out the values that I want. So for this one, I have some lines that are helpful. So if I can keep those relatively straight, I'm going to do that. And then go from there. And then I have another line. That next part is curved. So I have a couple options. I can use my line value, or I could come back over and use my spline tool, and that's going to be helpful. Now, more points is usually more helpful than less. So I have my spline that I'm going to fit to the pencil, and you can see at the end here, I'm going to get some weird curvature. So what I probably want to do is double click at that point and use a different type of sketch tool so that I can keep that as I want it to be. So we'll go back down and start it again. Where's my spline? And just moving up, putting some more points in. And you can see adding additional points up here is going to take that curvature and not make it so extreme on the previous points. So lots of points around that curve. And then basically what I'm going to do is trace the rest of my values. So what you can do again here is take a real world object and just basically trace it to scale. And then because of that, you'll be able to use it for different applications like your CNC router or your laser engraver to make sure that you can actually produce something in the real world.